1. Hello everyone, Nick the DM here to talk about another planar dragon. In today's video, we're looking at the Ethereal dragons, dragons native to the ethereal plane. So, let's take a look. Ethereal dragons spend a majority of their lives floating in the ethereal plane, spying on the planes that overlap it. Most of the time, an ethereal dragon is said to be in the border ethereal of the material plane. It isn't mentioned how often they spy on the other inner planes, but due to the nature of the border ethereal, it would make sense for an ethereal dragon to spend some time spying on the inner planes. Ethereal dragons are a pearlescent brown-gray color. For this reason, they were given the nickname Moonstone dragons, due to their similar color palettes. Ethereal dragons have needle-like claws and teeth, though they do not see much use unless necessary. These dragons are naturally curious and inquisitive, and they are intrigued by those, quote, stuck, unquote, on the material plane. Like most dragons, ethereal dragons are greedy and may yearn to have the treasures of the creatures they spy on. When this happens, an ethereal dragon able to may cross over to the material plane to take those treasures for itself, staying only long enough to collect the treasure it desires before returning to its home plane. Ethereal dragons prefer escape over conflict, heading into either the material plane or ethereal to escape its enemies. If forced into a fight, or if the dragon decides combat is necessary, an ethereal dragon will use its abilities to frustrate its opponent. Older dragons will use their dimensional anchor ability to trap opponents on one plane while fleeing to another. An interesting thing about the ethereal dragon is, unlike other inhabitants of the ethereal plane like ghosts or phase spiders, an ethereal dragon has limited use of its abilities to travel between the ethereal and material planes. While creatures like the ghost or phase spider can travel at will, an ethereal dragon can only travel via use of the etherealness spell that it innately knows, which is unique in the fact that other creatures can't cast the spell while on the ethereal plane. Though technically in 3.5, this was a spell-like ability, which kind of translates over to innate spellcasting, not requiring components and whatnot. And I did have to balance the difference between its old abilities, like older spells, Ethereal Jaunt, which does not match up to the new ability for Monsters, Ethereal Jaunt. It was a whole process. It was me going back and forth for a few hours, but I figured it out eventually. In comparison, the ethereal plane is the ethereal dragon's main plane, and traveling outside of it is unnatural, much like a human or elf going into the ethereal, as opposed to ghosts who can easily exist on both planes without much effort. Alright, now let's take a look at the stats I made for a 5th edition ethereal dragon. I'll be going over the ancient stat block and explaining some of the abilities that it has, as well as explaining its unique features and some abilities it would get at Great Worm level. So let's get into it. Ancient Ethereal Dragon. Huge Dragon, neutral. Let's start right there. Let's just immediately ignore the stat block for a second. It is a huge dragon at Ancient category. The reason I included this is in earlier editions, especially 3rd, all different dragons had different sizes as they matured. So, for example, the ethereal dragon as a wormling is tiny, as opposed to a red dragon being medium. Now, this isn't just between planar dragons and the chromatic and metallic varieties. This is within, like, the metallic varieties, whereas in 5th edition, all wormlings are medium, all young are large, adult huge, ancient gargantuan. They would vary from time to time in 3rd edition, and I just like to include that with the ethereal dragon specifically, considering it is a great deal weaker than most of the other planar dragons. But that's something I'm going to go into detail on in another video at a later time, is the different size categories of dragons, but I digress. Let's continue. Armor class of 19, that is natural armor. Hit points, it has 324 hit points, or 24 d12 plus 168. For speed, it has a 60-foot movement speed and a 30-foot fly speed. Now, two interesting things here. The reason its normal movement speed is so good and its fly speed is so bad, the ethereal dragons don't actually need to fly on the ethereal plane. That's not an ability used there. You can kind of just mentally make yourself move up or down or side to side, front and back, whatever. So the only time they ever got any ethereal dragon would get training with its wings is when it was on one of the inner planes, or more commonly the material plane. Now, this didn't happen often, so it made sense, and even in 3rd edition, that their fly speed was a lot lower. Meanwhile, their normal movement speed was a good deal higher. So I kept that here. If you look at the stat blocks that I made, and I'll tell you how to get to those at the end here, you can also see that I believe the Wormling had a greater fly speed than the Ancient. So that's just a little different, and I liked that, so I kept it. Now for its ability scores. It has a 24 strength, 10 dexterity, 25 constitution, 18 intelligence, 18 wisdom, 19 charisma. Overall, fairly well rounded, but not quite as powerful as certain other dragons, especially like Ancient Gold. Saving throws, it has proficiency in dexterity, constitution, wisdom, and charisma, giving it much higher bonuses to a majority of its saving throws. For skills, it has proficiency in perception and stealth. Senses, blind sight only to a range of 30 feet, even though other dragons would have it bigger. This I included due to its size being different from other dragons, chromatic and metallic. Dark vision out to 120 feet, and a passive perception of 20. Good borderline for a dragon that's very stealthy and very aware of its surroundings. For languages, it only speaks Draconic, though, of course, if one was to spy consistently on other creatures, it might pick up on other languages, especially with how old dragons can be. Even at Ancient category, the Ancient Ethereal Dragon only has a challenge rating of 17. The Great Worm, I believe, was placed at 19, so very, very low on the scale for dragons. Now we get into some of its abilities. Firstly, something all ethereal dragons have, regardless of age category, is ether cyclone immunity. So the dragon is immune to the effects of ether cyclones on the ethereal plane. If you check out the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide and the ethereal plane, you'll see more about the ether cyclones, how they slow travel on the ethereal plane. All ethereal dragons are immune to those cyclones. Next, another ability that all ethereal dragons have, regardless of age, is ethereal camouflage. The dragon has advantage on dexterity stealth checks made to hide on the ethereal plane. This is due to their natural hue and how well they traverse the plane. Improved ethereal sight. I believe this is young and older have this ability. The dragon can see up to 120 feet into the ethereal plane when it's on the material plane, and vice versa. So not only does it have double the normal line of sight on the ethereal plane that other creatures will, it can also see into the ethereal plane while on material or one of the inner planes, at least to the border ethereal surrounding that area. So it's very observant. Innate spellcasting. The dragon's innate spellcasting ability is charisma, save DC 18, plus 10 to hit with spell attacks, and it can innately cast the following spells requiring no material components. 3 times per day each, Etherealness. And then once per day each, Blink and Etherealness as if cast at a 9th level spell. Now, Etherealness is listed twice here, and there's good reason for that. That's because some of its abilities, its spells in earlier editions, Ethereal Jaunt, and Etherealness, have kind of melded into the general just Etherealness spell. Based on what level you cast it at. So I had to modify that a little bit. So you can see the asterisk next to 3 times per day. An ethereal dragon on the ethereal plane can instead use this spell to become material on whichever plane it currently overlaps, with the same duration as the normal for the spell. So they exist on the ethereal, and in the border ethereal they can use etherealness to put themselves on the material plane or one of the inner planes. Meanwhile, they can only cast this on themselves at with their once per day. They can cast it as if cast at a 9th level spell slot, which is 3. It's initially a 7th level spell, for each spell slot above, you can bring 3 creatures with you. So if this dragon, say, used Etherealness, went to the Prime Material Plane, and made a deal with adventurers and had to get them back to the Ethereal Plane, it would use its once per day Etherealness to bring up to 6 other creatures with it into the Ethereal Plane. Then its next ability, Legendary Resistance, 3 times per day. If it fails a saving throw, it can choose to succeed. Magic weapons, young and older have this. The dragon's weapon attacks are magical. And strike ethereal creatures, only the ancient category and up, if you're using Worm and Great Worm, have this ability. The dragon can strike ethereal creatures it can see as if they were material. This ability does not allow an ethereal dragon on the ethereal plane to affect creatures on the material plane. So while most creatures, however, let's explain this. If the ethereal plane and the material plane have the overlap, which is the border ethereal. If you're on the material plane, you can't normally be affected by creatures on the ethereal plane. If you're on the ethereal plane, you can't normally be affected by creatures on the material plane. Now, in older editions, there was certain abilities that allow you to do this. Even in 5th edition, I'm pretty sure there are certain abilities where you could hit that creature. But specifically for the ancient ethereal dragon, it can strike, if it's on the material plane or one of the inner planes, it can strike a creature within its range that's on that little overlap in the ethereal plane. But if it's in the ethereal plane, it can't strike creatures that it couldn't hit, or that it wouldn't normally be able to hit on the material plane. This is just kind of a balancing reason. It was the same in 3.5. Now for its actions. As normal with the dragon, it has a multi-attack, Frightful Presence, a bite, 2 claws. Frightful Presence is 120 feet, DC 15 Wisdom save. I may have screwed that up. I don't think I actually updated that from adult to ancient, but I am honestly not going to bother with it. It's enough as is. You can up it if you need it. You can bring it down. I've just realized I've made an error in here, but I'm not going to change it now because I'm already recording. Bite. It has a plus 13 to hit, reach of 10 feet, does 18 or 2d10 plus 7 piercing damage. Claw, plus 13 to hit, reach of 5, is 14 damage or 2d6 plus 7. Breath Weapon, it only has 1, unlike a majority of the planar dragons. It exhales a burst of energy in a 90-foot cone. Each creature in that area must succeed a DC 21 dexterity saving throw or take 63 or 18d6 force damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. When the dragon is on the material plane, its breath weapon also affects creatures within range on the overlapping border ethereal. So this is kind of reminiscent of earlier editions where force abilities could transverse over the border ethereal and hit creatures within that range. This was specifically mentioned in its breath weapon, so I decided to keep that moving into 5th edition, and I kind of like that. The last thing is its tail attack, plus 13 to hit, reach of 10 feet. Again, shorter range, it is a smaller dragon, and it does 16 or 2d8 plus 7 bludgeoning damage. Of course, that's its legendary actions, which I took the liberties of changing a few things with legendary actions. I didn't give it the same 3, I gave it 2 of the same ones as other dragons, and then I switched one. First, detect. The dragon makes a wisdom perception check. Secondly is the new one, dimensional anchor. This was a spell it had, but this spell isn't in 5th edition, as far as I'm aware, or I could find. So I made it an ability that it would have, so I kind of just shifted that around, and it makes sense. Ethereal dragons probably wouldn't have a wing attack. Their wings are kind of wimpy. But anyways, cost 2 actions. A ranged spell attack is a plus 10 to hit, range of 120 feet, hits 1 target. On a hit, the creature is bound to this plane of existence for 1 minute. A creature bound to its current plane cannot travel to another plane for the duration. A creature whose time on the current plane is limited by the duration of a spell remains on the current plane until the time of dimensional anchor ends. I kept switching that because I didn't realize if I made a typo or not. So this basically means, this is what I was talking about earlier, how the dragon can hit a creature with a dimensional anchor, switch to the ethereal or material, and that creature cannot follow it. What this also means is if you were to say use etherealness and you were on you were 12 seconds away from etherealness, shifting you back to the material plane, if this dragon hits you with Dimensional Anchor, you would still be in the ethereal plane until Dimensional Anchor ended. Then you'd be shifted back to your plane. So if you have something like concentration based or whatnot, it would still keep you on that plane that you're, or at least the inner plane or ethereal, as long as the duration of Dimensional Anchor is still going. So up to a minute, which is 10 rounds of combat, which can make this thing very hard to deal with. Though generally, if it's already used all of its ethereal shifts, if you've kept chasing it and whatnot, and it's run out, and you've all managed to keep dipping back and forth between the dimensions, you might have it cornered, and even though you can't leave the plane, you should be okay. And even if you keep following this creature, 1 minute is long enough for it to get pretty far away, but if you keep tracking it before it gets a chance to rest, it still won't have uses of etherealness, so it makes the encounter difficult, especially because it'll run away, but while it's running, it can't hurt you or the party. So it's a give and take there. It's good at running away, it's not so good in actual combat. Which is why this is a very good RP-based dragon. I like it for that. Its last thing is its tail attack, legendary action. One action, of course, makes a tail attack. And one last thing before we end the stat blocks. If you are looking at the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide and check out the Ether Cyclones for the Ethereal Plane, at Great Worm, so the oldest age category a dragon can be, potentially there's magic involved that can keep them older, but it's technically the last category of aging. The ethereal dragon Great Worm can summon an ether cyclone once per day. So it could use its ability, and based on the what it's like in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I'll just give you a brief little intro to that. Ether cyclones. An ether cyclone is a serpentine column that spins through the plane. The cyclone appears abruptly, distorting and uprooting ethereal forms in its path and carrying the debris for leagues. Travelers with a passive perception of 15 or more receive 1d4 rounds of warning, a deep hum in the ethereal matter. Travelers who can't reach a curtain or portal leading elsewhere suffer the cyclone's effect. Roll a d20 and consult the Ether Cyclone table to determine the effect on all creatures in the vicinity. So this, of course, would be an ability that the Ethereal Great Worm could only use in the deep Ethereal, not the border. But regardless, it can really throw off a party. Again, it's a really good creature at running away. But if you can bind it, stop it from using abilities, you'll be pretty okay. But anyways, continuing. So its effects is on a 1 to 12 on a d20 roll, the journey is extended. On a 13 to 19, blown to the border ethereal of a random plane. So you kind of just get shifted into the border of another plane, which can be difficult when you're traveling. Or 20, you're hurled into the astral plane. So this can be very problematic for a majority of the party. And of course, because you use it as a group check with the DC Charisma saving throw. Check out the Dungeon Master Guide for more on this. I'm not going to go too far into the Ether Cyclones, but just letting you know, the Ethereal Dragon Great Worm can summon one of these, and it is devastating. Alright, that is it for the Ethereal Dragon. 5th edition stats for the Wormling, Young, Adult, and Ancient Ethereal Dragons are over on my Tumblr. A link to that is down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like and subscribe for more videos like this. We're getting really close to 100 subs, and I am so excited. Once we hit that goal, I have a special video planned, and if you like Greek mythology, you might be interested in it. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!